Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I've got a gameplay commentary for you about my personal fear of flying. I'm going to be telling some stories of my own and some general information. The gameplay that you're seeing is me in a ground war open lobby that I ran through Twitter. All the open lobbies go through Twitter. You also see J-Hub running around doing his pub stomping thing. I'm going to end up getting a VTOL warship in this gameplay, which is about as close to flying anything as you're really going to get in Black Ops 2. I don't count the drones and smaller kill streaks because they're small and not quite as fun, and they don't rain down the same amount of terror as the VTOL. While you're watching this, I am actually on an airplane right now, flying to Los Angeles, California. I live in Texas, so I'll be flying from DFW to LAX, relatively short flight, and I'm on my way to E3, but quite literally, I do plan to upload this while I'm on the plane because it'll make it more topical. And I must admit that I have a fear of flying. I am afraid of getting on the airplane, and you're like, what? This is Drifter, the guy that tells ghost stories and is all logical. He doesn't afraid of anything. Well, I legitimately am afraid of flying and roaches. I don't like roaches. Anyway, the reasons for this are kind of funny, but I actually used to have no fear of flying. As a kid, my parents were divorced. My dad lived in Mississippi and my mother lived in Texas. My dad had a bad back and didn't drive, and the drive is just like 9 hours. It's not particularly fun, so I used to fly a lot. I mean, I was flying solo and changing flights at 7, and this is back in the day before TSA and 9/11 and that sort of stuff, so airplanes were really lax and relaxed, and it was probably not anywhere remotely close to secure. But it's something I did all the time, and I was very comfortable with flying, and I'd get on planes, and there'd be usually older people there. They'd be shaky. This is my first time on a plane, Sonny. I'm scared I'm going to crash and burn. And I would just say, look, it's just relax. The planes never crash. And I was kind of a troll of a kid, and I was like, don't worry about it. If anything goes wrong, you don't have to worry about being injured. You're just going to be completely dead, like that motorcycle logic. Don't wear a helmet. Don't be a cripple. Just go ahead and die. It was terrible, and it was mean. And now I have a similar sort of problem, but you're probably asking yourself, why are you afraid of flying? This is the safest mode of travel. This is the safest thing everywhere. Other than watching the movie Final Destination, which certainly didn't help anything, I had a professor in college that used to be an engineer for the British Air Force. I can't remember if it's British Air Force or British Royal Air Force, BAF, BRAF. I don't know how they do the acronyms. But this was back during World War II. This guy was super old. This guy was like 98 years old. He helped found the American Foundry Society, just like dinosaurically old guy. And what he used to do at the Air Force is he used to study failures. More specifically, it would usually be a material failure and not a mechanical failure. But we got to hear lots and lots and lots of stories about airplane crashes. And when I did my course on failure, of course, the thing we talk about is airplane and space shuttle crashes. So I know way, way too much about how and why airplanes crash, especially from the material side of things. Something like you get a microstructure crack in the wing or in the fuselage somewhere, and it's very, very difficult to detect with your eyes. Sometimes it's very small, and you'll fly through a whole lot of turbulence, and the plane will shake and wobble, and it'll shake. And every time it shakes, that crack is just being plied, and it gets wider and wider and wider. And if the material's too brittle, all of a sudden it's just going to split, and the fuselage is going to rip in half, and two parts of the plane are going to be flying everywhere, and everybody dies. This is the kind of stuff that worries me, mostly because it's a little bit hard to test for. They do check for it. They give it a good visual inspection and stuff in between flights, I hope. But it really, really bothers me. That's one of a million different ways that I learned about planes crashing and failing. And after college, when I had to do more flying and traveling, instead of having my very naive, small child brain, airplanes never crash, this is fine, I fly all the time, the only thing I can think about is that class where I learned about failures and every single thing that, terrible things that happen in airplanes. I'm like, but the odds are astronomically in my favor. Dying in an airplane is one of the least likely ways to die of anything ever. To put it in perspective, I've read, depending on if you measure it by mile, if you measure it by millions, I've had odds all the way from 1 in 20,000, which is a little bit high, to 1 in several million, to 1 in billions or trillions of miles traveled compared to other modes of transportation. But to put it in perspective, you're more likely to die in a car crash on the way to the airport than you are in the airplane. That's very true, depending on which city you live in, because some cities have crazy drivers, some don't. You are more likely to trip and fall and bonk your head on some sort of metal object there in the airport and die of some sort of trauma to the head than you are to actually die in the airplane. You are more likely to get struck and perish by lightning, so you can be struck by lightning more likely than you'll die in an airplane. You are more likely to be mauled to death by a bear, perhaps over picnic baskets, than you are to die in an airplane. You are more likely to win the lottery almost twice, not quite twice, than you are to die in an airplane. This is the big lottery, not the little scratch-offs where you win $5 prizes. And in some cases, even a combination of these things. Oh yeah, even a shark attack is slightly more likely than the airplane crash, if I'm not mistaken. And in some of these cases, even a combination of these things, like to win the lottery and then get struck by lightning, or to fight a shark and a bear at the same time, is approximately the same probability as being on an airplane and dying. However, that doesn't really comfort me. My perception of an airplane crash is, well, I guess I don't have to worry about being injured because I'm sure as hell going to be dead if something goes wrong 40,000 feet in the air. The reality is that most crashes, and I'm doing air quotes here, you can't see it, aren't actually fatal crashes. Then again, this depends on who's collecting the statistics, how they're analyzed, and what they count as a crash. They'll count any sort of minor failure or emergency landing as a crash, but 95% of these sort of things that happen are avoided, they're prevented, there's minor injuries, the plane lands, it gets fixed, and everything's okay. The catastrophic, fatal, awful, terrible crashes are exceedingly rare, and that's because, as I did learn in the engineering class, when something does go wrong at 40,000 feet in the air, it's very, very bad. So what they did is they designed these planes, and they over-designed these, and they quadruple, triple over-design these planes, and that means it's just like we're going way beyond factors of safety, to where it is extremely unlikely that they will fail from either a material or mechanical standpoint. Usually it's a maintenance error or a pilot error, instead of any sort of design flaw or wear and tear. They shouldn't, because they're, again, that goes back into maintenance, but they're extremely, extremely safe because they're very, very important. They're carrying hundreds of lives, and every time a plane crashes, not only are you killing people, but even from the pure financial standpoint, it's a nightmare for the company. So many lawsuits, so much payouts, so much bad publicity, less sales and tickets. Terrible, terrible, terrible thing. So they go through extraordinary lengths to avoid this from happening, and that is in some way a comfort, but what is not in my comfort is the feeling of a lack of control. Even especially driving, I'm not really the greatest driver. I do occasionally get into some scrapes or manage to avoid an 18-wheeler by the hair on my chinny chin chin, but I feel like I'm in control of that situation. I am in control of my own destiny. In an airplane, I am sitting in a meat tube that's flying through the sky. Like I feel like a piece of sausage, and the airplane is the wrapper around me, and they're just chunking me. It's like, maybe it'll land, maybe it won't. I'll just sit here and just trust the pilot that I've never met before, that everything will be fine. Whereas even though I don't know how to fly, I might actually be more comfortable sitting in that cockpit doing at least something to help. That's just kind of how you are. Even though the odds are drastically in my favor, I can't stand that feeling of a lack of control about what I'm doing. Ooh, there goes an airplane right now. I don't know if you can hear it in the commentary, but I do have a few tips for you here if you're like me, if you have a fear of flying, or if you think I'm a little girl. But one of the other neat things I learned in that particular class is that when you look out the window and you see the wings flapping, and this always did bother me when I was a kid, the wings on an airplane kind of flap. They bob up and down a little bit like a bird. Not so much forward and backward on the horizontal plane, but a lot on the up and down plane, especially in turbulence. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the wings are bending. The wings are bending. This is really bad. They're bending. When they're bending, that's a good thing. If the material were completely rigid and stiff and hard, like we're thinking about most metals, then instead of bending, they would just snap. That would be very, very bad. When they bend, you allowed to deflect a little bit of that energy to kind of soften the blow. And the flapping and the wobbling in the wings is just them working as designed, because like I said, if they didn't flap, they would get those little cracks and they would eventually just snap. But as long as they can bend and they're flexible and they're the right material, when the wings are flapping, that's a good thing. The next little tip I can give you, it sounds like a terrible, awful, talking down to you tip, but it really is the best I can do. Just relax, try to read a book, try to watch a movie, watch the in-plane flight, radio, take a nap, do whatever. Just don't focus on an airplane. Think of it like a really, really boring bus ride where you're waiting in a doctor's office, because it's about as comfortable. And honestly, you're less likely to die in the airplane than you are just at a regular checkup at a doctor's office from tripping and falling. So you do be comfortable in that way. That's kind of all for the fear of flying on this commentary. I would like to say that I'm going to E3. I'm going to be testing out all the new consoles and games and stuff, and I'll be giving you my opinion and breakdown on them soon. And if you're in LA and you're in E3, then I will see you at E3. Drifter out.